I look there or look there. Okay. Okay. My name is Alexa Ann Watson, and I am the great-great-great-granddaughter of
Frederick Douglass is my great-great-great-great-granddaughter
of Frederick Douglass.
I am the great-great-great-great-grandchild. I've been counting on my fingers since I was like 5.
This is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom.
Fellow citizens, I shall not presume to dwell at length on the associations that cluster about this day. The simple story of it is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men, and if they did not go mad, they became restive under this treatment.
With brave men, there's always a remedy for oppression. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence?
Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us?
I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary.
Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common.
The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me.
The sunlight that brought life and healing has brought stripes and death to me.
This 4th of July is yours, not mine.
You may rejoice.
How you doing, Dr. Coates? Dr. Coates. How you doing, Dr. Coates?
Second, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
All right, and let's see here. Because the host has stopped my video. Okay, you have to turn on my video.
Let me see. Yeah, I think I just made you co-host. You should be able to put your
All right.
All right, there we go.
All right, now let me see here.
Hey, he's
Share.
over there.
All right, share that. Can you see that?
He's in the conference room. Mhm.
Can you see that, Stephen?
Yes, sir, I can.
All right, you can see my
Hello.
slides.
They are. They're not over there. They don't have one. I told him, I put in the help desk ticket and I was talking to him yesterday and I told him I'll be over there at 11. So. Okay. All right. Bye. All right. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
You can see my slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. I'm gonna stop sharing it now. So
right.
we should be okay, good.
Now I have a question for you. I'm gonna share my screen. I want to know if you can hear my videos.
Okay.
All right.
Has it started? Now, there you go.
So look
I
there.
can't hear it yet.
Okay. Okay. My name is
All right,
Alexa
perfect.
Ann Watson.
Perfect. So I have So I have 2 videos to play.
Okay.
I'll start playing them at like 11:15, 11:10.
11:15, that'll be,
I'll-
I thought it doesn't start till
Yeah,
11:30.
it doesn't start till 11:30, but they're just videos in case people want to sign on early. That way,
Oh.
they're not just looking at us. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
well, no, we can just turn ourselves off, man. You can put a screen up, starting at that way. Folk at the time, I think that's some good information that you're sharing, and there might be some folks that show up at 11:30 that wouldn't see those. It's your call. You running it.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'll just play these at 11 because Miss Katrina, she was even saying that she like, what if people sign in early?
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Hey, it's your thing. Do what you gotta do. I can't tell you who to sock it to. Okay.
Yes.
Bottom line is we're gonna have some fun. All right.
Yep.
We're gonna piss off a couple of people. We're gonna have some fun.
That's always the fun part, making people mad.
I think I'm gonna like you. Okay.
Yeah, I love it.
As I tell people, you know what? Back in World War II, that's before World War One, before they had GPS. Pilots didn't know when they were over the target until they started getting shot at. Okay,
Man.
so if you're getting flat, people shooting at you, you over the target. Okay.
Yep. Yep. You right where you need to be.
Right where you need to be. And if they ain't shooting at you, if they ain't trying to stab you in the back, if they ain't trying to, mess all over your birthday cake, then you ain't doing nothing.
You ain't doing something right.
You ain't doing that. Okay. I keep telling people, look, why did Jesus get crucified? Because he was over the target. Okay. I'm going to try to do that. Of course, my other computer said it needs to update, and I found out that you update it when it wants to get updated, okay? Yeah. Or else it's just gonna sit up there and just start acting funky on you.
Crazy.
Are you the only one here?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so it's like, when you're dealing with your lady, and you don't give her the attention she needs when she needs it, all of a sudden she starts acting funky with you.
Do I look there or there? Do I look there or there? Okay. Okay. My name is Alexa Ann Watson, and I am the great granddaughter of
Frederick Douglass is my great granddaughter of Frederick Douglass.
I am the great grandchild. I've been counting on my fingers since I was like 5.
This is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom.
Fellow citizens, I shall not presume to dwell at length on the associations that cluster about this day. The simple story of it is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men, and if they did not go mad, they became restive under this tree.
With brave men, there's always a remedy.
I don't think you guys are speaking.
They succeeded.
And
today, you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you, therefore, may properly celebrate this anniversary.
And then I'm gonna lay it off to him.
Fellow citizens, pardon me. Allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent to do with your national independence?
Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us?
I am not included
Yeah.
within the pale of this glorious anniversary.
Your high independence only reveals the
No,
immeasurable
you good,
distance
man.
between us.
Hey,
The blessings
you
in
hear
which you
everything good on
this day rejoice are not enjoyed in
Ah.
common.
The rich inheritance of justice, liberty,
perfect,
prosperity,
I got
and
this video
independence
just to
bequeathed
run.
by your
I got
fathers
2 videos
is
to
shared
run
by
till
you,
like
not by me.
11:30. Then I'm gonna
The
come
sunlight that brought life
the
and healing
intro,
to you has brought
and then we
stripes
can
through death to me.
This 4th of July is yours, not mine.
You may rejoice, I must mourn. Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions. At a time like this,
this my
irony,
office number.
not
This my
convincing
office.
argument.
Take that to myself.
Oh, had I the ability and could reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but
863.
fire.
It is not the gentle shower, but thunder.
We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
The feeling of the nation must be quickened.
The conscience of the nation must be roused.
The propriety of the nation must be
Yep.
startled.
The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed.
And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim.
To him, your celebration is a sham.
Your boasted liberty an unholy license.
Your national greatness, swelling vanity.
Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless.
Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence.
Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery.
Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings,
With all your religious parade and solemnity are to him
mere bombast,
Fraud,
deception,
impiety,
and hypocrisy. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country.
this speech was written almost 170 years ago, but this part of it is still extremely relevant, especially with today's protests.
I think that when people are oppressed, they feel silenced. And if someone feels silenced, they get angry. There are certain tactics that you need to use to get people to really hear your voice. And it's not always going to be just like a very calm discussion.
I think it's mostly talking to people who are already on his side, but believes that they can still try to talk this out, or that things are still justifiable. I know a lot of people at the time were saying, and people now are still saying that it's not as bad as it could be.
While the 4th of July probably does not feel the same to me as it does to others, I wouldn't say that it has no meaning, because it is the time when America as a country became free from another country. But I would say that it's not the time in which I gained my freedom.
He had a lot of hope, especially for his age. And like, I'm getting to the point in my life where I'm only 20 years old, but I'm exhausted. Like I have these thoughts like, will we ever really get to this point? Or is this really something that we should actually spend our time fighting for?
Somebody once said that pessimism is a tool of white oppression. And I think that's true. I think in many ways, we are still slaves to the notion that it will never get better. But I think that there is hope. And I think it's important that we celebrate Black joy and Black life. And we remember that change is possible, change is probable, and that there's hope.
New Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola, born for an older taste. Jack Daniels and Coca-Cola, born for this.
Juneteenth is a deeply emotional moment for enslaved people because for decades, for centuries, enslaved people prayed for, hoped for, fought for in the form of slave rebellion, running away, fought their freedom when they could. If you read slave narratives, listen to years from the era of slavery, you know that enslaved people longed for freedom. This was something that had been hoped for, but many believe may never come.
Not sure so much to give him $40 a month in debt. Let look to the boy, say they ain't want, you better go free, you know.
Being able to go wherever they wanted, being able to wander about. For enslaved people, it was an expression of their freedom.
Well, that photo was the one that long wish photo, one of our white folks made. We come along, we all sitting on the fence, and the colored children come along and asked her, did she want to go with us? She said, yes, she might run them horses. She went on with them. I never did see her and hit her no more.
When I think about Juneteenth, I think about it in the context of Emancipation Day celebrations that began January 1, 1863. They took on a whole new meaning when slavery was formally abolished after 1865. You would have had African-American veterans who fought in the Civil War be prominent in these celebrations, dressed in their military garb, speeches from enslaved people, the most prominent Black politicians singing of hymns, spirituals, discussions of registering to vote. Enslaved people celebrating in public their newfound freedom was an act of resistance. Because we have to remember, slavery came to an end after a 4 years bloody Civil War. Still the bloodiest conflict in American history. Many people in the South and in the nation who did not want to see slavery abolished fought tooth and nail to block the 13th Amendment. The abolition of slavery created a huge humanitarian crisis in the South. Suddenly, 4 million people have very little means to take care of themselves, to support themselves, and do so in a really hostile environment. So the military was necessary to make sure that enslaved people got the food, the medicine, the shelter that they needed in order to survive. They're also there to protect, to the extent that that was possible.
Hello, Brother Coates.
From violence.
Katrina,
From
look at you. You know, I
How
was
are
thinking about doing my hair like that today.
You
You
should.
know, then I saw Stephanie's hair and I was gonna do it like that, you know, and I just changed my mind and said, what the hell, you know, you gotta be you.
I got the Baduism going on.
Hey, you got that. I don't give a damn attitude going on, you know.
Next time.
I'm gonna put my self on mute and take it. I gotta do something real quick, but I want to make sure I could get on.
Mama, where they going? They're all going home now.
when the last federal troops leave the South, it's a signal to Southerners the federal government wasn't going to put its might into ensuring civil rights of Black people would be observed. You have 20, 30 years later, Black people being lynched in public, and there isn't a federal anti-lynching law to protect them. In most communities in America, there's a history of lynching and racial violence. And very few communities have marked that commemorated. Every decade since the end of slavery, Black people have been more educated, accrued more wealth, more status in American society. Every decade since 1865. But there's been one constant, and that constant is the presence of random racist violence. What I see in George Floyd's murder was a white police officer attempting to dominate and to subdue a Black man who was not resistant, who could not resist. Even though slavery came to an end in 1865, the desire to master and dominate Black bodies did not. And we have never dealt with that. These are the kind of stark realities that are highlighted during Juneteenth. If Black people's lives can be expunged through racist violence and no one is held accountable, how free are we? Are we free?
All right, all right. Good morning, everybody.
All learning to save and
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Juneteenth regional celebration, a celebration of freedom. My name is Stephen Morales. I'll be your host today. I am the coordinator of diversity and international student affairs here at the University of Pikeville. To put on this event, I would like to bring in and help and acknowledge our partners. Today in partnership, we are partnering with Southeast Kentucky Community and Technical College, Big Sandy Community and Technical College, Ashland Community and Technical College, and Hazard Community Technical College. If you guys joined us before, you would have seen a few videos that does highlight just a little bit about Juneteenth. And if you have missed them, we do have another one for you. So just sit tight and watch this video right here.
My name is Marcia Chatwin. I'm a professor of history and African American studies at Georgetown University. I'm a historian of African American life and culture. Juneteenth is a commemoration holiday of June 19, 1865, when a group of African Americans in Galveston, Texas, received the news that they indeed were free. President Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, but news of the end of slavery in Texas had not traveled to this country until 1865. Since then, Juneteenth has been a day of commemoration of the struggle against slavery and celebration of freedom. One of the biggest misconceptions about Juneteenth is that people often think that was the day that slavery was in the United States. But in fact, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in the United States, was passed in the Senate on April 8, 1864, and the House on January 31st, 1860. Although Juneteenth celebrates the knowledge of slavery, it's important to remember the conditions that mirrored slavery, whether it was Juneteenth or the civil rights, or continued struggles to fight racism. This continued with many African groups. And so the Juneteenth holiday reminds us of where we come, and it also inspires us to think about the places we go. African Americans left the South to pursue opportunities throughout the 20th century in northern and western cities. The celebration of Juneteenth grew from being a Texas-based celebration to a national one, in which people gathered with families and friends and community to remember the incredible struggle of a people against slavery and to create new traditions and allow them to reflect about the struggle for civil rights and the ongoing struggle against. Although slavery is the fight for civil rights has continued to the present day. So Juneteenth provides people with a sense of encouragement and inspiration to continue to fight on behalf of their community and their families and freedom. And it also is a holiday that, as it continues to become more and more popular, it allows people to look back at the past and encourages them to learn more about it. As more and more institutions recognize Juneteenth and work to commemorate the incredible legacy of slavery in the United States, I hope Juneteenth becomes a day where people commit not only to acts of justice in their local community, but to investigate history in a more deep and thoughtful way.
That was just to give you a little background information on Juneteenth. We do recognize that a lot of people do not understand the importance of Juneteenth or even know what Juneteenth truly is. So therefore, we have been blessed today with our special guest, Dr. Rodney Coates. Dr. Rodney Coates joins us from the University of Miami, Ohio. Dr. Coates is a public sociologist engaged in critical race and social justice and social movements, social policy and practice. For Coates, being a public sociologist means that his work must impact the wider communities. He has conducted bias training for school districts, police, and universities. He works with local communities, corporations, and Miami University to establish pathways to progress for underrepresented students in such a field as STEM, business, and law. At Miami University, he was the driving force for creating the Miami-Cincinnati Scholars Program, which provides full scholarships for underrepresented students going into STEM. He has developed and taught various courses, such as Introduction to Critical Race and Ethnic Studies, and Introduction to Social Justice, just to name a few. His course on globalization, social justice, and human rights, which links universities from around the globe, including the United Kingdom, Moscow, Milano, Italy, Spain, and the British Columbia, has received several awards and has been featured in published articles. Dr. Coates developed a summer bridge program for scholar athletes in their freshman year. This course, treating the athletes as if they were honor students, sets the expectations and curriculum to challenge them to perform way above what they believe they could ever accomplish. Increasing GPA and graduation rates have increased each year the program has been offered. In 2022, he received the Mid-American Conference Professor of the Year Award for this program. Coates has a record of scholarship that spans 3 decades and includes numerous published peer-reviewed articles, books, book chapters, and collections. Certainly an accomplished profession, Dr. Coates is no stranger to the University of Pikeville. He has been a 2022 convocation guest speaker, and we are excited to have him back with us as a regional guest speaker for Juneteenth. Without further ado, everybody, we present Dr. Rodney D. Coates. Just a few highlights before we get into the presentation. Dr. Coates is gonna go ahead and present for us. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we will save the last 15 minutes of this presentation to answer those questions. All right, we appreciate everybody, and Dr. Coates, it's your show.
Mr. Morales, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Pikesville, for inviting me yet again for this, I think, important moment in time. Let me begin by first sharing my screen and we'll go from there. Right. Oh, that's the one. Remember, this is live and not Memorex, okay? In 5 days, we shall celebrate yet another Juneteenth here in America. This is a celebration of what many consider to be the end of slavery for Blacks in this country. 2.5 years after, however, the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, the celebration was accomplished as federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas in 1865. But as with all historical events, this one is filled with ironies and paradoxes, hopes dashed and dreams unfulfilled. This event to many represents the duplicity of power, the cruelty of complacency, and the willingness of many to forestall, deny, and even ignore the plight of the enslaved person. Consequently, as I will argue in this talk, the so-called freedom of the enslaved person was a check that continually has come back marked insufficient funds. They were offered the premise of a promise yet to be fulfilled. Let me begin. When slavery first started being counted in this country, 92% of all Blacks in this country were living in slavery. At the end of slavery, a full 89% of all Blacks in this country existed as enslaved people. The first question as we think about this and the sheer number of people involved is, why did it take 2.5 years for the news of freedom to reach Texas? Some argue that it was deliberately delayed to placate angry slave owners still in denial. Others say that the federal troops waited for the order to give the enslaved one last chance to, believe it or not, get the cotton harvest in. But then we must also understand that the war, our bloodiest ever fought, had nothing to do with slavery and everything to do with power. The enslaved were just another set of pawns in this political gambit as our nation's leaders, North and South, battled to see whose version of America would prevail. One controlled by the Northern industrial elite and the other controlled by the Southern plantation elite. There was no concern about whether the enslaved would be free, as acknowledged by Abraham Lincoln himself, and I quote, "My first impulse would be to free all slaves and then to send them to Liberia, to their own native land. But a moment's reflection would convince me that whatever of high hope, as I think there may be in this, in the long run, its sudden execution is impossible. If they were all landed there in a day, they would all perish in the next 10 days, and there are not surplus shipping and surplus money enough in the world to carry them there in the many times 10 days. What then? Free them all and keep them amongst us as underlings? Is it quite certain that this is a better situation for them to be in? I think I would not hold one in slavery at any rate, yet the point is not clear enough for me to denounce people upon. What next? Free them and make them politically and socially our equals? My own feelings will not admit of this, and if mine would, we will know that those of the great mass of white people will not. Ultimately, Lincoln did what was expedient to force the rebellious slave owners back into the Union. He freed those enslaved people only in the states in rebellion. That is, he released those enslaved people he had no control over. No enslaved persons were freed from those states loyal to the Union and not in rebellion. A premise that never came to pass as the great mass of white people refused to allow it to come into being. The premise that all men, humans, are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. The least of these rights being life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which constituted the premise of the Emancipation Proclamation. Promise would go unfulfilled, a check written, return marked with insufficient funds. And it is this check that constitutes the paradox of American justice that yet goes unfulfilled. But how did we get to this American paradox? The Civil War ended, yes, April 9, 1865, as Robert E. Lee surrendered his Confederate troops to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, thus ending the costliest domestic wars America has ever fought, as an estimated 1.56 million Union and 800,000 Confederates forced battles for supremacy. At the close of the war, some 4 million Blacks, constituting 86% of all Blacks, were now free, but another 250,000 in Texas languished in slavery. Neither Lincoln nor Washington had any real impact on Texas, primarily because there were not enough Union troops to enforce the order. Such force was not available until after the surrender of General Lee in April of 1865, and General Granger's regiment arrived 2 months later. Listen as Granger declares their freedom in his General Order number 3. The people of Texas were informed that all people were free following a proclamation of the executive of the United States. This involved an abolition of equality of rights, and absolute right, equality of rights, and the rights of property between the enslavers and enslaved people. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired hand. This is what it actually says. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and to work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere, unquote. I cannot help but wonder if any whites were advised to, I quote, remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages, and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Never in the history of this country was such a restriction or expectation placed on whites. As we will see later, these were the seeds through which the infamous Jim Crow laws and codes would ensure. But for now, let us consider the response of the former enslaved people. The responses of formerly enslaved people ranges from shock to exaltation, from acts of retribution to praise, from prayers and celebrations to cries of despair and loss. Some left not only the plantation, but the South, seeking to reestablish connections with family and communities, broken and shattered as a consequence of slavery. Others stayed to attempt to take freedom where they were enslaved, regardless. These enslaved people challenged America to recognize the equality as they sought to establish themselves as free people within America. Ironically, One of the first things these free people sought to do was embrace education. It should be recalled that under slavery, it was illegal in many states to teach Blacks, either free or enslaved, reading and writing. But even under slavery, Blacks facing severe punishment still found ways to support and encourage education. Therefore, it is not strange that after the war and emancipation, the now freedmen gathered in homes and cellars and sheds and meeting houses, and even under the shade of trees in the fields, where they worked the crops to learn. They learned from each other, teachers, clergy, and other older family members. They not only learned to read and write, but they retained their histories as a people. They retold these histories. Imagine the scene recorded from South Carolina as a 6-year-old girl sits beside her grandmother and great-grandmother, over 75 years old, all embracing learning and reading for the first time. From the beginning, many of the freedmen distrusted the carpetbaggers, the former masters, and demanded to learn to read for themselves, to learn math, to read the Bible for themselves, to explore the great questions of all time. And so therefore they established their own schools. Freedmen schools is what they were called, to establish this. These freedom schools were often funded with the aid of white allies and benevolent societies from the North, such as the American Missionary Society and the National Freedmen Relief Association. Sabbath schools and night schools were established. But most of the monies to fund these schools came from the newly freed Americans themselves, who privately and religiously supported their own schools. One example of these were, and many times these schools also were churches on Sunday. And one example of these church schools is in the picture here that appears in, that is actually in Sharpsburg, Maryland. It's called Tolson's Chapel, built by Blacks just 2 years after the end of slavery in 1864. And for over 30 years, between 68 and 1899, this one-room building was both church and school near the Civil War Battle of Antietam. The history of the schools housed in Tolson Chapel illustrate how African Americans across the former slave-owning states created and sustained schools through Reconstruction. Here, the dreams of freedom were born as local Blacks sought to educate themselves and their children. Consequently, as African Americans established their schools and advocated public education, they claimed education as a basic right of citizens. This dedication of the former enslaved to education laid the foundation for publicly funded schools for both Blacks and whites throughout the South and border states. These newly freed Blacks sought to become economically independent and exercise their full civil and political rights, along with the right to education. One of these efforts' most significant outcome was the establishment of all Black towns across America. These freedmen towns, as they were called, were established by or for a predominantly African American population. Many were founded by formerly enslaved people and existed in many of the former Southern states. For example, before the end of segregation, Oklahoma boasted dozens of these communities, while in Texas, some 357 freedom colonies were verified and located. For a brief period then, the promise of freedom flourished as Congress passed, then slowly, the states ratified the so-called Reconstruction Amendments. These three amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, Amendment would abolish slavery and attempt to guarantee equal protection of the laws and the right to vote. So briefly, the illusion of freedom existed as the 13th Amendment prohibited involuntary servitude. The principle of citizenship was ratified with the 14th Amendment for all born and naturalized, and the right to vote and decide who could hold office. These rights were again reinforced with the 14th Amendment, which established the full citizenship rights could not be abridged due to race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. Of interest is that all the debts associated with the insurrection of rebellion against the United States and even the claim for the loss of emancipated people were considered unenforceable, and all claims would be illegal and void. And the problem was apparent as the Constitution denied women, Black women in particular, the right to vote for the first time. And unfortunately, these amendments did not provide any enforcement provisions, nor preclude the former states or its members from seeking to nullify, negate, and to circumvent these laws. Consequently, no sooner than these amendments were ratified and after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, state laws and federal court decisions began to erode and nullify much of those rights throughout the late 18th century. Many states passed what would be known as the Jim Crow laws that limited the rights of African Americans specifically. And then decisions made by the Supreme Court, such as the Slaughterhouse case in 1873, undermined and prevented several guaranteed rights, making them unenforceable by holding that these privileges or immunities could not be extended to the rights under state law. And finally, Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 established not only separate but equal, but gave federal approval to all of the Jim Crow laws, these laws that would not be challenged until Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 and the Civil Rights Act of the Brown versus Board decision of 1954, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Voters' Rights Act of 1965. The response of Southern whites to these newly freed persons who were trying to express their freedom was not, however, limited to either legislative or court actions. As American Blacks celebrated their new freedoms, many whites in the South mourned the passage of what they believed was their greatness. For many Southern whites, this was personal and represented a communal defeat, marking the demise of the white man, his superiority, and a time for dismay. They mourned the loss of traditions and customs and family and property, and a whole way of life built with the blood of Blacks, the sacrifices of the Africans, and the lives that were distorted. Many considered leaving, while others began to retreat into nostalgia and fictitious memories of the Old South, and mourning the lost cause of the Confederacy. It's strange that the first Confederate Memorial Association started appearing in 1865 and 66 as they built cemeteries and monuments throughout the region. Others created groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, which resorted to violence and murder and terror to oppose the newly freed Americans trying to be free. The story of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street and hundreds of other Black colonies illustrate the terror that ensued as Africans sought to create their freedom. No sooner than the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were enacted, white which provided legal and civil protections to formerly enslaved peoples, members of the Ku Klux Klan began systematic terrorist attacks against Black citizens for exercising their right to vote, for running for office, for serving on juries. And quickly, Congress responded by passing a series of enforcement acts, 1870 and 71, which attempted to end such violence and empower the president to use military force to protect the African American. The Act of 1870, for example, even prohibited groups from banding together or to go in disguise under the public highway or the premises of another, to violate another's constitutional right. Legislative intent aside, these acts did nothing to diminish the harassment of Black voters across the South. Seeing the lack of enforcement, the Senate passed two more force acts. One known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, designated to enforce the 14th Amendment in the Civil Rights Act of 1866. A second force act was passed in 1871, aimed to place national elections under the federal government's control and empower federal judges and U.S. Marshals to supervise local elections. Then a third force act was passed in 1871, which gave the president the ability to use armed forces to combat conspiracies aimed at denying equal protection of the laws and to suspend habeas corpus and the necessary powers to enforce the act. And for a brief period of time, these acts served to end violence and intimidation. But the formal end of Reconstruction in 1877 opened the floodgates to disenfranchisement and once again the violence targeting African Americans. And absent these protections and the insurance of Jim Crow laws throughout the South, it was essentially open season on Blacks. Lynching became the most frequent weapon to terrorize Blacks and to force them into submission. By 1877, lynchings were so normalized that they were flagrantly committed as public displays. Do a search on the internet. You see people dressed up as they invited friends and neighbors, advertised in local newspapers. Large crowds, whole families would show up to watch Blacks get their quote unquote justice. All too often, Blacks were punished for being prominent, being free, being successful. Many whites, both rich and poor, use these to keep Blacks in their place. Often the Black was projected as being a sexual predator. And this was used to fire up the masses, and all too often the real insult was that the African American were perceived as being political and economic threats, not sexual predators who wanted to foster integration to assault innocent white women. Lynching and white riots were used to teach them a lesson, put them in their places, and served as a warning to any Black arrogant enough to challenge white supremacy. From the late 19th century to the middle of the 20th century, there were close to 5,000 Blacks were lynched. In the state of Mississippi alone, 500 Blacks were lynched between 1800 and 1955. But lynching was not restricted to the South. As in my home state, Ohio, 35 people died from just 1897 to 32. Few were innocent, as the full range of whites, from journalists to legislatures, from police to judges, from labor leaders to clergy, were anything but innocent bystanders. But Blacks were not content to sit by and be lynched. As Blacks voted with their feet and initiated the largest domestic migration movement in history, as millions of Blacks, my grandparents being some of them, relocated from the most violent regions of the South to presumed tolerant North. But the white mob was not content to lynch single individuals. Soon whole towns were annihilated. And what you see here are Black massacres that occurred throughout this country. Over the last few weeks, America has become absorbed and shocked by the massacres in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. But we should point out that Tulsa was just one of at least 50 separate events where African Americans were violently expelled from their homes in cities and counties within the United States. Most of these occurring just after the Civil War and lasted until 1954. To date, few have been brought to trial, even though photos by the tens of thousands still can be found in the internet. Never has domestic terrorism, public murders, and riots been so celebrated. And of course, even as lynching and wholesale Black massacres began to wane, the Black church continued to be the central target of America's racial angst. And herein lies an irony. During the whole of the 19th century, only one church, the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, was burned down in 1822. Over the next few decades and into the 20th century, an average of 6 churches were burned every year, every decade. Then we hit the end of the 20th century, where over 30 Black churches were burned in just 18 months, between 1995 and 96. In 96, Congress passed the Church Arson Prevention Act, and Clinton established a presidential commission to document the burning of Black churches, and they reported as many as 877 Black churches were burned. But the spate of Black churches had not ended. From then to 2018, another 16 Black churches were burned. And within the last 2 years, another dozen of Black churches have been targeted. These attacks were aimed at the spiritual core of the African American community. They sought to kill the spirit, but what they did was fire up the community. Resounding calls could be heard as Blacks said, hell no, we aren't going to run. And what are the costs of this violence? During the period of slavery, the United States, if enslaved people had been reimbursed for their time in forced servitude, it would have been an estimated to range about 18 trillion to 6.2 quadrillion, compounded annually 3 to 6%. Another 35 trillion to 16 quadrillion for the loss of land and property. And finally, no one can calculate the cost of pain and suffering over these 400 years. And again, it would be in the quadrillions. This has been the cost of white violence perpetrated against Blacks. But where do we go from here? I would argue we start with a new premise and articulate a new promise. Even as I write this, I know the triple threats Blacks face. These threats: curtailment, and suppression of voting, police and racially motivated violence and attacks, yes, on the Black church, and attempts to shut down conversations such as this, conversations that go under the rubric of critical race theory. As we examine these threats, we recognize that they are not isolated, but represent a systemic attack upon the Black community across America. And throughout American history, whenever the nation has been confronted with an existential threat, it has targeted racial groups, particularly Blacks. This targeting has been multiple forms from personal attacks to mob violence, from lynching to massacres, but of late, these have been institutionalized as the state has become a chief instrument of violence. Hence, we note the cradle to prison pipeline and the mass incarceration of particularly Black males, and the war on drugs. We report the militarization of the police and the over-policing of our neighborhoods. We note the harsher sentencing and the racialized use of the death penalty. And we note the increasing likelihood of Black children being expelled from school, our churches being destroyed, and our livelihoods continually threatened. These continual assaults have increased psychological trauma, mental health, and life expectancies. Blacks, however, have not responded as victims, but as victors. As Michelle Obama said once, when you go low, we go high. Each generation has fought to regain what was lost, reignite the fire of freedom, walk with dignity, head held high. As we celebrate another Juneteenth, we celebrate the spirit of victory, even as we acknowledge the tragedies that continue to beset us. The current attacks on voters' rights has a long and tortuous history dating as far back as 1865. We've been down this road before where, in the name of freedom and democracy, many states with heavy Black voters developed systems of checks to restore their faith. Strange, none of these on the surface were racist. All of them made sense until they were applied, and that application, not particularly the laws, resulted in the wholesale suppression of the Black vote. A suppression that lasted some 100 years, from the Voters' Rights Act of 1865 to the Voters' Rights Act of 1965, and here we are again. States across America are debating and passing legislation that aims to install the 1776 project and reject the 1619 project. The argument that critical race theory is a racial attack on whites is absurd and dangerous. Critical race theory does not blame whites for what happened in the past, but it does point to the pain currently being delivered by that past. It challenges much of our historical accounts that belie these historical realities. In another paper, I argued that critical race theory, and what makes it critical, is that it tells the story of our history from the vantage point of the formerly enslaved, rather than from the vantage point of the slave master. It helps to balance the scales by telling all of the stories of our history, not just the ones that we feel comfortable about. It means these stories from the vantage point of those that were victimized but never became victims. Imagine the story of rape or incest or any other crime. Now imagine that we only hear the side of the rapist or the perpetrator and not the victim. Critical race theory recognizes that the more sides of the stories we tell, the more balanced those histories can be. And finally, the problem with police violence, it's not a problem with police. My father, by the way, was a lifetime, 30 years as a police officer. My younger brother is a state trooper in the state of Illinois. That is to say that policing has been militarized to the point where our guardians have become warriors. As a consequence, police go to war every day. As a veteran, and yes, I fought in the Vietnam War, honorably discharged. I can only imagine what it's like to be involved in a never-ending battle. This is a war with no clear lines between us and them, between combatant and defender. Perhaps it's time we declare a truce and rethink the purpose of policing. In the process, we might decide that the problem is not police and courts, but schools and training. The issue is not bad kids, but bad opportunities. Let us help to create hope and better opportunities by increasing the success rates in our schools and life chances of our kids. And rather than trying to get the kids to adjust to the schools, maybe we need to adjust the schools to the kids. And in those situations where we do need police, maybe they need to be accompanied by drug and family counselors, social workers, and psychologists. Dealing with the threats will define the current struggle for justice and equality originally promised on Juneteenth. And we have a long history of dealing with the existential threats and sustaining our fight for justice and equality. Here, let us remember that the struggle and the reality of self-declared freedom. In 1775, English scholar Samuel Johnson wrote, "How is it that we hear the loudest screams for liberty among the Black?" The first anti-slavery societies founded the year the Declaration was penned. And while some debated the compensation slave ownership received, many argued for payments for the enslaved. When asked about the emancipation of the enslaved person, William Lloyd Garrison remarked that emancipation was not enough. We must be free from the caprice of man's cruelty. Frederick Douglass argued that the Negro must own their souls and their futures. They must have universal equal rights and liberty. Angelina Grimke in 1877 remarked that freedom of Blacks was a human and moral right that could not be denied. Black history, Juneteenth, is American history. It's an American celebration. Black liberation is essentially American liberation. Until all realize the promises of democracy, of the Declaration of Independence, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, none will experience these promises. Although victimized repeatedly, we have not succumbed to becoming victims. We have and continue to be overcomers. We have rebuilt what has been destroyed, relocated where we have not been wanted. What we have not done is abandon our quest to breathe free. Nor have we failed to achieve in every field of human endeavor. We have served in every war this country has fought, from the Revolutionary War, with courage. We have built and continue to rebuild our homes, communities, and lives. And what are these accomplishments? Matthew Hennessy and Admiral Robert Peary explored the North Pole in 1900. Jesse Owens demonstrated to Hitler that a Black man could win the gold medal, in fact, in 1936. Jackie Robinson would become the first Black to enter Major League Baseball in 47, even while Blacks played the sport for over 60 years. We have Thea Gibson, Venus Williams, Coco Gauff, and Naomi Osaka, who were the world's tennis players. And with pen and prose, we have poets that continue to strike our souls. We have this amazing young poet, Amanda Gorman, the youngest inaugural poet in the US history, award-winning writer, cum laude graduate of Harvard, who showed what the future looks like. And yes, we have Barack Obama, who became the first Black president of the United States. Kamala Harris, the first Black female vice president of the United States. African-American innovation that impacts all aspects of our life. We eat potato chips, first created by George Crumb in 1853. Many of us have played with the Super Soaker, invented by NASA scientist Lonnie Johnson. Mobile communications owe their beginning to an 1887 invention by the telegraph by Granville T. Woods. Open heart surgery, pioneered by Daniel Hale Williams in 1893, have saved millions of lives. And if it weren't for Kamika Carbon, Dr. Kamika Carbon, we would not have the miracle associated with the COVID vaccine. And so therefore, we do not wait or expect freedom from legislation or judicial decrees. We are free by virtue of being human. And as we enjoy yet another Juneteenth, we shall continue to preserve, serve, invent, and excel by any means necessary. We will not only continue to survive, but also thrive and set new standards of achievement. It is more than our right, it is our mandate from the Creator of all. We will settle for full accountability and responsibility, yes, for past wrongs. And while we recognize that reparations are due, we have no confidence that they will ever come. Nor will we take any more promissory notes. We will, however, demand that schools and courts, political institutions and economic systems, police and legislatures act responsibly, equitably, and justly for us and our posterity. To guarantee these premises, we promise to do the following: litigate, assemble, agitate, propagate, and instigate to continue revolutionary struggle. We shall do more than overcome. We will more deliberately and meticulously and strategically utilize and maximize our voting, economies, and communities to foster change and reality. And as I close, let me end with 3 stories, because I think stories are important. One, going 143 years ago, by the person of Anna Julia Cooper, just 21 years after the end of the Civil War, and her message was simple: the plight, the reality, and the future of not only Black America, but America itself depended upon the success of Black women. For too long, the church and the clergy, the politicians, the education, even Black men thwarted these efforts by placing constraints on Black women's hopes, dreams, and opportunities. Cooper's voice provides a clarion call not to look back, but with inflated conceit, but to glean wisdom from the experiences, to capture the spiritual essence of our being, and to look to the future with hope and trust. This voice shrugged condescension and victimhood, yet shouted determination and the radical amelioration, liberation, and regeneration of Black women and the Black community. Cooper ends her book with hope, believing that Black women shall arrive at the promised land. And almost a decade after Cooper was writing her voice, we see W.B. Du Bois publishing The Souls of Black Folks. And in this collection of essays, Du Bois dreams toward an action plan for Black freedom in the 20th century. He began with the question: what is it like to be a problem? A problem complicated by prejudice and lawlessness and ruthless composition. What is it like to be a Black and an American? 2 unreconciled selves, 2 paradoxes, 2 ends of a spectrum in one body. 40 years after the promise of emancipation, freedom was still elusive to the freedmen, he argued. Who the Black was constantly vilified and condemned, over-policed and undervalued within just one generation, however. Blacks had crafted an institution that provided escapes from prison and poverty, mediocrity and complacency. Yet, the souls of Black folk, the spiritual strivings of the people was made manifest as they went from enslaved person to free, from forced laborers to skilled artisans, from farmers and became farmers and owners of businesses and homes. They created thousands of businesses, thousands of clergy and teachers and doctors in the process. While Black history is marked with progress and resilience and perseverance, it is easy to ignore the trials and tribulations and suffering endured by many Blacks over the ages. Maya Angelou reminds us of this, and she remarks, I know why the caged bird sings. This is a particular true in that this autobiographical work that traces a life often interrupted by tragedy, moving from kin to kin, grandparents to separated parents. Maya Angelou talks about being the ugly duckling, battered and abused, both sexually, mentally, and spiritually. But after being raped, becoming pregnant, and disgraced, she continued onward. She did not allow these obstacles to drag her into hopelessness and despair. Head held high as she looked at her child in her arms. Graduating from high school, and the rest, by the way, is history. And she informs us, why could the caged bird sing? Because she dreams of freedom. Blacks have existed as caged birds in this racial cage, systemic racism of America. Yet they have sang songs of liberation and jubilation. How could they do that? Because they continue to dream of freedom. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dr. Coates. Next, we will go into our Q&A section. For that, I will divert to Ms. Katrina Ruggles. She's the Director of Diversity and International Student Affairs here at the University of Pikeville. All right, Dr. Ruggles, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Morales and Dr. Coates. Certainly a very informative session. We have several questions. I'm getting some text messages as well as ones that are in the chat. So here's a question from Kevin Harrison from Ashland Community College, Big Sandy's Ashland Community College. What was the catalyst to move the government to make Juneteenth a federal holiday?
With the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the protests that took place across this country, this is what was the impetus for Congress and then Joe Biden a couple of years ago to pass this as a national holiday. But Blacks obviously did not wait for the federal or the state governments to do this. We've been doing it for 100 and some years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I certainly believe that also that with the number of back-to-back incidences that we were having, I think it really scratched the consciousness of America to challenge the idea of, are we really free? Is freedom really free? And is everybody experiencing lived experiences the same across America? So I thought it was a really good opportunity to connect the community with the journey of freedom. Okay,
but also help inform allies. All right.
Yes. Yes.
And encourage us to have this dialogue about freedom. Okay, where we've been, where we're at, and where do we need to go?
Yes, yes. And certainly I believe you touched on that when we had the convocation, that, you know, yes, this might be the lived experience of African Americans, but there were several allies for freedom that helped push this work forward through the civil rights, throughout history. So as we look at freedom as it comes under attack now, it's important that it's more important that we have those allies to help push. Okay, let me find another question. I'm going between my phone and did any of the slaves, after they found out they were free, go to Liberia or African countries after slavery?
Yes, in fact, Liberia was established by a couple of shiploads of former slaves. The United States actually, there was a but repatriation society. Okay, they actually attempted to. The idea was that, and Abraham Lincoln endorsed it. We're going to take all the Africans and take them back to Africa. And that's how Liberia got started. And if you go to Liberia, they speak English, they use United States dollars. These are farmer enslaved peoples, okay? Abraham Lincoln came to the conclusion that he did not have enough money to ship back the 4 million plus Africans back to Liberia. Okay, and that's the reason why it didn't go. And of course, there was Marcus Garvey that did the whole Back to Africa movement in the 1930s and 40s. That didn't go too far for multiple reasons. Okay, but there's been continual efforts to reconnect Africans with their homeland.
Thank you, Dr. Coates. There's a question in here that says, I thought the 4th of July was for everyone. Was it not?
The 4th of July celebrates the Declaration of Independence and American so-called freedom. We got to understand that at that point, we also enshrined slavery in this country. It's interesting that if you go back to Thomas Jefferson's first Declaration of Independence, he states that one of the reasons why America was fighting for freedom was because the king had fostered upon the colonies this cruel system of slavery that it enslaved a innocent group of people. Okay, but it's interesting that the southern states said, look, if you leave that in here, we're out of here. Okay, and so therefore that was taken from the first Declaration of Independence, and in its place we put the 3/5 compromise. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence for Africans would have to wait almost 100 and some years for the Emancipation Proclamation and then Juneteenth before Blacks could celebrate freedom. And that's why Juneteenth is a celebration for the Africans, because they were not free on July 4th.
Okay. I have another one that says, what is a good way to convey the importance of celebrating Juneteenth in communities that have a small percentage of Black people?
This is where allies come into play. All right. It's just like, look, one, Blacks are going to celebrate their holidays no matter what. Okay. For their allies, how does one demonstrate that they're an ally? They demonstrate an ally not when there's a crisis, but you know what? Not when there are problems. We're going to celebrate in times of good too. Okay, and this is where goodwill comes into place. By the way, I find it interesting that during the Ides of March, everybody celebrates St. Patrick's Day. Valentine's Day was a French holiday. Okay, so we've got. I mean, I go and celebrate Oktoberfest, which are German heritage, so forth and so on. Why? Because I have friends that are Germans. I celebrate the Italian holidays. Okay, so this is what we do here in America. All right, we are a nation of the most diverse nation in the world. Okay, so what do? We celebrate that diversity. That's what makes us Americans.
I think that's a very good point, because oftentimes we, especially being, for instance, in Eastern Kentucky, where a lot of people may not understand the importance of Juneteenth and that it is American history. And sometimes as leaders, you try to figure out a way, you feel like you have to figure out a way for individuals to understand it, but you don't want to water it down. So we have a balance between it is Juneteenth, this is the history, but also it's a celebration of freedom. And, like, are we watering it down saying it's a celebration of freedom so everybody can feel as if they're a part of it? Or how do we continue to go forward and say, this is American history? We like, just like Oktoberfest, just like Valentine's, just like the other holidays that we have allies, we have a diverse group of individuals celebrating. We should do the same here.
You know, I never will forget as a child celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Okay.
Mhm.
And no one challenged and questioned a Black kid in the ghetto, because I come out of it, the ghetto, East St. Louis, Illinois. Okay. Where we're wearing green on this day. Okay. In honor and recognition of St. Patrick's Day. Okay. Why do we make such a fuss over celebrating someone else's holidays, okay, such as Blacks or Native American, okay, or Hispanics, okay, or any other group that constitutes this thing that we call America, okay? That's what makes us strong. That's what makes us great.
I agree. And as we look at the celebration of this holiday, one of the reasons why we decided to bring this group together, so we have a partnership, as Mr. Morales has said at the beginning, we have Big Sandy, we have Ashland Community College, Southeast Kentucky Technical and Community College, and Hazard. I hope I didn't leave anyone out, because we have realized in isolation, it's harder to bring about change. So we want to bring it to scale. So that's why we have partners to help bring change to this region. And I think that's a good segue to say, if you look into the chat, I know Southeast Community and Technical College, there's a link to the events that they have coming up. So we encourage all of our listeners to consider going to those events because they have different ones at different locations. And we also have Hazard Community College. The Facebook link is in there. So there's an opportunity for us to scale not only Juneteenth, but regional efforts to try and support diversity, equity, and inclusion within the region. So I think that's all the questions that we have. Let me screen a little bit because I have to go between my cell phone. Okay. An important day of history. Along with that, how can we continue? I think this is along the same vein. It said, how can we make this important day of our history more mainstream? That's one question, if you want to. And then how can we, I think you and I had a conversation and you started touching on it about this question, along with how can we continue to educate about the importance of Juneteenth to all Americans. And we had some conversations about books and ways that we can do it on campus. You want to share a little bit about that?
Well, that's why I ended with those three stories of Anna Julia Cooper, of W.B. Du Bois, and Maya Angelou. I found it, one, interesting that across the country, we're once again having conversation about banning books in colleges and libraries and so forth and so on. Okay, I believe that there are three ways that we can improve what we're doing. One, let's read each other's stories in books. Okay, so not just, and let's not compartmentalize these. Okay, let's have an American book reading club. Okay, where each month we're going to read another book by a different group of people that constitute America. Let's read some books by some Italian authors. Let's read some books by Greeks and English and French and German authors. Okay, let's read some African authors. Let's read some Hispanic authors. Let's read some Latino. Okay, let's read some authors written by women and by LGBTQ individuals. Okay, let us share our stories. One, two. I love music. Okay. All right, let's have some days where we're gonna play some music from some country. And what I started my class this past year each day I played a different genre of music. Okay, so I played some country and some folk music. Okay, I played some Italian kicking. Okay, hell, I even brought some Asian hip hop artists. Okay, into class. Okay, I did black, I did soul, I did Hispanic, I did Native American. Okay, and I found that students related to it. And I encourage my students, look, you got a song, represent you, bring it to class and talk about that, okay? And using the class to do this, okay? And then lastly, I forgot what school it is, but they encourage people to invite to lunch someone who was radically different from themselves. Okay, and again, once a week or once a month, let's reach out to someone who does not look like us, does not act like us, does not fit into our circles. Okay, all right, be it at Pikesville, be it at Hazard, be it at Southeast Kentucky, be it here Cincinnati, so forth and so on. By the way, and that might be the janitor. Okay, that might be the administrative assistant. Okay, that might even be the president of the university. Okay, let's reach out of our circles. Okay, and expand our circles to become inclusive of us all. All right, and in the process, all right, and let's not do it this as if it's some kind of formality. Okay, let's do it because, oh, let me see, we're Americans. Okay, all right, and this is what a family of humanity does. And oh, by the way, I got relatives that are blood relatives I don't particularly like. Okay. All right. I mean, some of you all might have some. Okay. I got a weird Uncle Harold. Okay. I mean, homeboy is weird. Okay. I mean, like you read about, right? But that doesn't stop me every once in a while from calling them up and saying, hey, how you doing? Okay. All right. Why? Because it's family. All right. We can do the same thing as Americans. Okay. And by the way, if you want to make America great,
Okay.
that's what you do. That's how you do it. Okay. And then maybe we can talk about making America great again, but we haven't gotten there yet. Okay. So let's talk about making America great. Okay, by becoming inclusive and recognizing that's at the base of the Statue of Liberty. You know what it says? Give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. Let's embrace these huddled masses, all of us, and let's celebrate that freedom and our humanity.
Wow. Wow. You know, I think sometimes we make it more difficult than it can be. Do you see, hear, and value the people that you are around? When you told this story, I remember sometimes we have these events and these, award ceremonies, and we're always awarding faculty and teachers. And I remember we had this award ceremony and my daughter nominated the janitor. Because she said when he saw me, I was very low and he would encourage me every day. And sometimes we underestimate the power of connection, especially in the age of Zoom meetings and, just the way that we flow. So I think I have one more question. Please, oh, wait, I see there's more in the chat. Hold on. How does this holiday bring hope and an attitude of freedom for all Americans? In other words, how do we not take our freedoms for granted?
Let me back up. Freedom and democracy are the most fragile systems you could ever create. They're fragile because they require us to embrace freedom and democracy. Freedom and democracy are active terms. That means that we must be actively engaged, not passively accepting. Okay. all right, actively engaged in freedom and democracy, by the way, means that that we recognize that, by the way, for every right, there's a responsibility. For every right, there's a responsibility. We have a right to freedom of speech, but we have a responsibility not to use that speech to ridicule and defame someone else. We have a right to vote, but we have a responsibility to vote and to be aware of voting. We have a right to love who we choose to love, but guess what? We cannot use that to abuse that person in the process, okay? All right, so but recognizing that our rights are tied to our responsibilities, and what are we responsible for doing? We have a responsibility as Americans to embrace this thing called America in all of its diverse forms, okay? All right, and not waiting for a holiday, not waiting for an event, not waiting for another incident, not waiting for something to say, oh, wow, did that just happen? But in the pursuit of happiness, this thing called happiness, what is it? Okay, it's not just my happiness. See, my happiness is dependent upon your happiness. You don't believe that's the case? Then check it out. If the people in America are unhappy, guess what? There goes the economy, there goes our freedom, there goes this whole fragile thing that we call democracy, okay? All right, so we invest in America, not by just investing in ourselves, but investing in others, okay? And by the way, that starts with those at the very bottom of the barrel, okay? If the only people that are important to us are the people with the PhDs behind their names and the titles in front of their names, okay, guess what? We have some serious problems, okay? And as your daughter informed you, the most important person in her life on some days was the janitor, okay? All right, I recall in New York City a few years back, there was a debate over how important were the garbage collectors. No one said, well, they're just garbage collectors. They just pick up the trash. Oh, what the hell, okay? So what did they do? They went on strike. And within about, I don't know, about a week, people began to see trash accumulate, okay, a mountain of trash on every street corner. And suddenly they said, where are our most important? They ceased being garbage collectors and they became sanitational engineers, okay? Gee whiz, all right? Maybe in our classrooms, we recognize that we should give attention to that student who is at the bottom, okay? Maybe we should, the one that is isolated, the one that is not talking. COVID, by the way, has demonstrated something to us, that we see the escalating rise of divorces, escalating rise of, it seems like every week we have another mass shooting, the escalating rise of mental health, so forth and so on. All right, why? Because we went through this intense period of being isolated from each other. We have a whole generation of young people that have spent the last 3 years almost in isolation. Now they're stepping out of that isolation, realize that many of their social functions they no longer know how to do. Okay, well, maybe we learned something, that we are human, and part of being human means that we are social creatures and we need to invest in that social existence. And maybe in the process, we might discover that we're all linked. We're all we're all part of this humongous thing called humanity.
And sometimes I think we make it, like I said, more difficult. If you really look at what the flow of the nation was during COVID, some of our freedoms were taken away.
Yeah.
They were impacted, but we figured out how to innovate, and we figured out how to do some things better. Yeah. By when freedoms were taken away, that's kind of an unintended consequence. But imagine if we had those behaviors, some of the behaviors we learned when we didn't have the shutdown, how much further would we be as a society? So go ahead. Did you want to say something? Okay,
No.
no, the only thing I was gonna say, there's a comment in the chat by Virginia Mager that says that kind of piggybacks on some of the stuff that we talked about as far as connectivity, that Southern Poverty Law Center instituted a Mix It Up for Lunch Day once a year in schools. I thought that was really interesting to hear. It's voluntary, which we would want people to volunteer to do it. You mandate it, then it gets a little, it's superficial.
Yeah. I remember some schools somewhere just put a bench in a public space. And they encourage people that are feeling isolated and alone just to sit on that bench. And they encourage others. If you see somebody sitting on that bench, go and just say hello. Okay. And we don't need these formal structures. Okay. But we did learn something again in COVID, that there was a lot of things that we do that we don't need to do. Okay. And a lot of things that we thought we absolutely needed to have, we didn't really need to have those. But the one thing that I think we all missed was this communication, this social connectivity with each other. And therein lies our future and our hope.
All right, so that brings me to the end of our questions. So I will turn it back over to Mr. Morales. Again, look in the chat for the Juneteenth events that are happening regionally. And also we have at UPike, we have pizza over in the admissions office. So if we want to have some dialogue, pizza and salad. So join us over there. There's already individuals over there holding it down. The Black Student Union is holding it down and hosting anybody who wants to be there. So Mr. Morales, I turn it over to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Miss Katrina Ruggles. Thank you, Dr. Coates. We want to thank everybody for being on the call today. We do appreciate you for joining us. It was a powerful message, Dr. Coates, very good information. If you guys want to stick around, we will be showing the videos that we were showing before the actual program started. I'll be replaying those videos for you. And again, please be on the lookout for our different partners and their different events for Juneteenth. Again, we want to thank our partners in Southeast Kentucky Community and Technical College, Big Sandy Community and Technical College, Ashland Community and Technical College, and Hazard Community and Technical College. And of course, Dr. Rodney Coates himself. All right. Again, we want to thank everybody for joining us. Please be safe this weekend. Have a blessed weekend and celebrate Juneteenth. Also, stay tuned if you want to see those videos.